Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7, I believe it is, of the Filmmakers
Hello.
Guide to the Galaxy. I'm joined here tonight with James Bushe, director and writer.
Hello, guys.
Oh, and he's just dropped his phone.
John,
Well done, James.
I'm back.
And P.J.Dillon, Director of Photography, Cinematographer. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
PJ.
Well,
happy to be here.
Thanks for everyone joining us who's watching live on YouTube. Please do leave your comments and reactions on the side column or beneath. And
Any questions as
any
well?
questions as well, definitely. Well, we might as well start off. I don't know if you're allowed to say, but what were you in the middle of filming when all this happened and you had to go home?
I was in Prague shooting part of Falcon and the Winter Soldier for Marvel, which is sort of it's sort of the continuation of the Captain America story after Endgame.
That was my guess, was that you were filming that. Because
Yeah.
I read a bit that it was filming there, and then you said you were leaving, and I put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, so we'd been shooting in Atlanta. We shot the bulk of it in Atlanta, and we'd 5 weeks left to shoot. We'd 2 weeks left to shoot in Prague, and then we were going to return to Atlanta for a few more weeks. And then just when the whole pandemic thing sort of took off, we were pulled out of Prague, sent back to Atlanta, and then a couple of days after that, the show just shut down. Or went into hiatus rather than shut down.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was going well. We were nearly at the end. We could see the finish line, but I guess we'll be heading back now at some point.
Yeah.
Well,
who knows
that's
when?
Very frustrating.
Yeah. It'll be proper frustrating for that to happen.
What were you shooting on? I take that's for Disney Channel or something like that. Or...
Yeah, for Disney Plus.
Right.
It was for Disney Plus. It was six 1 hours for Disney Plus. One director, Carrie Scogland, one DP, myself.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
Yeah, so it was nice, and I mean it had been going well, I think.
What kind of kit were you using, camera and lens wise, on that?
So we were shooting with DXL 2s, Panavision DXL 2s, and T series anamorphics.
Oh, nice. Okay, they're going the brave route and sticking to anamorphic. Are you having to frame a little white to make it bigger on the 16:9, or? Yeah,
no, it wasn't 16:9. We were shooting with a wider aspect ratio, and the features, Endgame had been anamorphic, and some of the previous ones have been anamorphic. So we thought we'd try to continue that filmic aesthetic, So we went down the T series route, and I think it was looking good. I think we were getting nice results.
They're the close focus ones, aren't they?
Yeah.
And do you have to? Are they presenting that in 2:4:1? Are you having to allow for them zooming in a little bit to make it a little bit taller? I think it's 2:2:1 or something. Whatever the.
No, I think it's going to be 2:3:9.
Oh right. Nice. Okay.
Although I don't know if that's 100% decided yet, but that's certainly we were shooting for 2:3:9.
Yeah. Oh right. Well, look forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, amazing.
I'm sure you look forward to finishing it.
Yeah, for sure. So close.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I guess tell us a little bit about how you became a DP, because I see you went the more traditional path by working sort of through the camera ranks, and you're a trainee, loader, focus puller, etc.
Yeah.
How did that all come about? Like, how did you get to where you are, really, by working through those ranks?
Well, so I guess when I was in college, which was the late 80s, there wasn't a great deal of film production. There was very little, actually. And initially, I wasn't really sure, when I went to college, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But I was introduced to film at that time and just, became enamored. And when I came out of college in 1989, there wasn't really a great deal of film production happening in Ireland, so I sort of made the calls and tried to get work in commercials and various things, but it was difficult at that time. And then just by pure coincidence, a neighbour of mine I come from a very small town in the southwest of Ireland in Kerry called Listowel, and a neighbour of my family's, was a playwright, and one of his plays was being adapted into a film by Jim Sheridan, who just made My Left Foot at the time, so it was kind of a big deal. A film called The Field, and he actually came to me. That the John B. Keane, the playwright, approached me and said, "Look, would you like me to see if I can get you a job on that?" So that was my in. So I got a job as the trainee clapper loader in the second unit, which I did for about 6 weeks, but just managed to, I guess, meet enough people that then I got another break on a film called Hear My Song, and did that for a few years, camera trainee and on sort of working on freebies as a loader and as a focus puller, and eventually started shooting shorts and stuff. So I sort of had a dual thing going on where I was working as a camera assistant, mostly on very low budget stuff, and then working as a focus puller, an operator, a DP on no budget stuff for a few years. Then I went to the States in about 94, 95 thereabouts, and I worked there for a while as a camera assistant, and again met a bunch of people there, and ended up shooting my first feature there in 2000.
Yeah.
And after that, I guess I'd mostly worked as a trainee as a loader in Ireland, and then when I went to the US, I started as a loader, and then transitioned to being a first AC. Never really worked as
for the US. Did you obviously have to get a visa and everything else, and then
I'm a US citizen because I'm a US citizen because my folks were US citizens.
Oh, okay.
So
one of the lucky ones.
So
you get a free passport.
No, exactly. I never had a difficulty traveling to the US or working there. So I went to New York and sort of worked as not a very good camera assistant. I think probably in New York for a few years, but was also there shooting pop promos and shooting short films, and then I just got a break through people I met to shoot a feature, and once I shot that feature, I think I maybe did a couple of more jobs as a focus puller after that, but effectively then was decided I'd be a DP. I never really worked as an operator, but I obviously operated on the features I shot and stuff.
Yeah.
And then I was also sort of directing a little bit, like directing short films and stuff. And then there was a period of 3 or 4 years where I was sort of wasn't really sure what I was doing. I was sort of directing sort of cheap TV commercials, also shooting some stuff. And then in about, I think 2004 thereabouts, I shot maybe a little later than that. I shot a really low budget feature in Morocco, and it sort of was an epiphany for me. I was like, okay, this is what I should be doing, So I at that point then sort of stopped directing and just concentrated fully on being a DP, because I sort of realized this is what I want to be doing and what I should be doing.
Yeah. So you even dabbled in directing at some point then as well.
I did, yeah. I directed some commercials, not all very sort of low budget for local TV in Ireland. I never directed any sort of big international campaigns or anything like that. And then I directed some TV stuff, like TV comedy stuff. And I was kind of half working as a DP, half working as a director. But then at a certain point, it became apparent to me that the path I needed to take was working as a DP.
Yeah, I think, some people have that early on and some people have it later. And I'd done 2 other careers before this, so
right.
I think, and I likewise, I was like, I need to do, one thing or the other.
You might get back into directing later on. You never know.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it. At some point, like I did have some opportunities to direct features and stuff, and I passed on them ultimately. So I don't know that I kind of. It was difficult. It was a difficult choice to make ultimately, but ultimately I decided that my route was, to be a DP. And some of the TV shows I've worked on have asked me if I'd be interested in directing an episode, and I've always.
Was that just because of your background in doing it a couple of times and having
exactly, like
experience
Vikings particularly, you know, like I would have shot so many episodes there that the producers did ask me if I'd be interested, but you know, I, like, with the greatest respect, declined.
You should have said yes if you pay me twice as much, or at least because I'm not doing it for free.
No, but I mean, I think I found my niche. You know, I think I found what I enjoy doing. Like what I realized is anytime I did direct, I was miserable most of the time. You know, I didn't really enjoy it a great deal. I found it a bit torturous actually, and you know, and I didn't need to be the center of attention. You know, so I thought, you know, that's okay. I'm perfectly happy, but because I really love being a DP. Like I love being on the floor. I love every aspect of it, and I feel that, you know, whatever sort of creative itch I need to scratch in my life gets well and truly scratched by being a DP. And I like I like collaborating with directors. Like I do really enjoy that. I don't need to be, you know, the alpha or whatever, you know what I mean? I'm perfectly happy to collaborate, and I get great satisfaction from that, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, you had mentioned, you know, being an island and stuff, but I mean, for me, I mean, I've got Irish grandparents and stuff, and I know that it wasn't a huge industry like, you know, quite a few years ago, but I mean, it wasn't on my radar anyway. And I mean, until, as far as I know, until Game of Thrones and Vikings, you know, that's when they, you know, as soon as they started filming that, that's where it kind of started to get a bit bigger and really started going. It started exploding over there. Is that right?
Yeah, well, no, a bit earlier than that. I think. I mean, there'd always been an industry here from, well, not always, but you know, from the 50s, a small but sort of significant and healthy at times and not so healthy at other times, you know. But like the commercials industry was always very vibrant here, and I guess you know, throughout the 80s and the 90s, there were a lot of, you know, big features came to shoot here. Like I worked on Far and Away, which shot here for you know, a significant amount of time as a trainee, and there was, you know, TV shows like Scarlet, which was the sort of a TV sequel to Gone with the Wind, and there was a bunch of things like that. The Old Curiosity Shop, like big productions shot here in the 80s and the 90s, and then the Tudors actually probably was when
and then Ripper Street as well, right?
Yeah, then Ripper Street, but Ripper Street wouldn't have been anywhere near the scale of the Tudors or Vikings or any of those. You know what I mean? So I guess the Tudors and then after that Vikings. And Vikings started a year after Game of Thrones started in the North, but the North is sort of a different industry, same island, but different jurisdictions, and I guess because there's different financing and different tax breaks and stuff. The two, you know, like crew from the North would come down and work here, and obviously crew from the South go and work up there. But they are sort of two different industries, really, and. So Game of Thrones was happening there, and Vikings and a couple of other things were happening here. So it's been good. It's been good. There's been sort of
an influx of money from America and
So there's usually at any given moment in Ireland there would be at least one big US production shooting here. You know, and usually there are a couple.
Yeah, not nice and healthy, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's small compared to the UK or compared to most places, but it's you know, I think the standard of technicianship is very high here, and so it's a good healthy industry.
And when, I mean, obviously, like when Ripper Street, I know you worked on, and then Vikings and things like that. But did you find that? Like from a certain date, like working on Ripper Street, you then were on a roll in terms of getting show after show, because it certainly looks like that on your credits in terms of what.
Well, actually, I shot an episode of Game of Thrones before Ripper Street, so like my big break was Game of Thrones, and that came about sort of very fortuitously. in that I'd actually tried to get on to shoot second unit on it after season 1, and one of the Irish producers said, look, it's somebody I know for a long time, and he was very frank but honest with me and said, look, I don't think you'd really be in the running. They tend to try and bring their DPs in from the States. And at about the same time, just coincidentally, I'd gone to LA to try and get an agent, and I passed my reel around, and my reel, there's a friend of mine called Brian Tucker who lived in LA, and he gave my reel to somebody who somehow gave it to David and Dan, the Game of Thrones showrunners, who were looking for DPs just at that moment. But it was literally right place, the right time stuff, even though I wasn't there and I had no direct contact, and they saw it. And I think one, maybe it wasn't even my reel, maybe it was a feature that I shot called The Runway, directed by a guy called Ian Parr. And anyway, I think they saw it and they liked it, and then there was a whole process whereby they contacted me, and by some miracle I was asked to shoot an episode, which I did, and like didn't, probably in hindsight, did not do my greatest work on that episode because it was kind of overwhelming, but did enough, I guess, to be asked back later. But the fact that I had Game of Thrones on my CV, because by that stage it was an international phenomenon. That definitely opened doors. So
you got that in America. That job, is in through someone giving your CV to someone in America. Not even the fact that you were in Ireland and you were like, "Oh, I'm in Ireland." No. I mean, you didn't even have to pay for me to get a flight.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that at all. It was the fact that the showrunners, Dave and Dan, saw.
That's quite incredible.
Saw something. I think it was even as simple as Brian had given it to somebody who had an office in the same block on whatever same block that their office was on in the studio lot, and. I actually don't know. I don't know exactly what the mechanism was, but somehow somebody that wasn't me handed them my reel or that film, The Runway, and
So, and that was second unit or the main unit on Game of Thrones?
That was main unit. Main unit.
And,
yeah. But one episode. So I came on to do one episode on that season, and I mean probably the most significant thing was meeting the other DPs on the show, because suddenly I realized, okay, if you're to survive at this level, you're really going to have to up your game, and what was brilliant is how generous they were and continue to be, Kramer Morgenthau and Jonathan Freeman and Martin Kenzie was the DP on that series as well, and unfortunately he passed away shortly after that, but Kramer and Jonathan have remained friends, since then, and they were incredibly generous with their there was no sense of rivalry or anything like that. They just wanted the show to look good, so they were very generous with their advice and continue to be, to be honest,
Yeah, I mean, we might as well. And so, I guess, sorry, James, just go into because you kind of, I guess, brought it up. We were going to ask it a bit later, but I mean, in terms of the scale, I mean, like you were doing before that Ripper Street and a few other shows, but you then got Game of Thrones, and then you went on to you were going to say Vikings after that, and then back to Game of Thrones. But I mean, in terms of Game of Thrones going back and forth, how did you find you personally? You said it was daunting and you have to up your game. How did you find it personally, in terms of the angst of it all, and doing Game of Thrones, then going to Vikings, then back to Game of Thrones? How much more confidence did you have going back a second time?
Well, to be honest, Game of Thrones came before Ripper Street. So, so I went from shooting like very low budget features, like very low budget, like the biggest feature I'd shot at that stage was probably €2 million, something like that, so I went from there to Game of Thrones. Now, like I had been a a technician in the industry, you know, and I'd pulled focus on a couple of bigger jobs. So like I wasn't completely unaware how you know a big budget film set worked. You know, that I was familiar in that regard. But I guess that the pressure's a curious thing, and there's a lot of politics is the right word, but like there's a lot of scrutiny and you know, it's really how you handle that. That's become, you know, it isn't. What I found was it wasn't really so much about the quality of the work; it was how you handled the pressure of the environment, right? You know, and maybe actually in that first season 2, when I shot one episode, I probably didn't handle it that well. If I'm to be honest, but you know, the producers were great. Like they're really terrific people and very supportive. And you know, I think that even though I may not have you know, shone in that season, they were willing to give me another chance. And I think when I came back and did later seasons, certainly I feel my work is much better. You know.
I mean, I know that personally that you know, especially when you're on, you know, the lower budget stuff. Not that Game of Thrones is that, but you know, I get really stressed. And I've noticed that when I have more time, and maybe not more time, but more people around me knowing what they're doing, and it's kind of, it's almost a calmer environment because that they're all able to do their job 100%. There's a little bit more money. It's a little bit more kind of, you know, army-like in operation. Whereas when it's lower budget, it's all a bit more chaotic, and I can get really stressed sometimes. And
a lot more indie.
Yeah. So I find that more stressful than sometimes bigger stuff.
Well, I mean, it's different. I guess it's different. They're different kind. It's different kind of pressure, you know. And you know, like I did find
all eyes on you, I guess.
That level of scrutiny can be daunting enough, you know. But I think if you can, you know, put that to one side and just deliver your work. But I guess what I learned on that first season of Game of Thrones I did, season 2, is that you would imagine that when you go onto a huge show like that you have sort of with any amount of resources and with fantastic crew, that you would have very free expression. Do you know what I mean? And that didn't happen for me on that first go around. When I came back later, having sort of worked at a higher level on other shows, I found that much easier to deal with and to execute.
To have less creative freedom, or
well, no, I mean, it's not that you've less creative freedom, but having the confidence to do things. I think maybe on season 2, I didn't have the confidence to really like express myself. You know, I played too safe at times. I was too careful. I was maybe trying to please everybody.
But I think sometimes that's sometimes you have to play the safe card just to get through it.
And that probably was you know, the mechanics of that. Later when I came back. But the other thing is, by the time I'd come back for later seasons, the look of the show had developed quite. So like season 1, the difference between season 1 and season 3 in terms of the look is quite remarkable, and I think that in season 2, you know, it was still trying to find how it looked, and you know, Kramer and Jonathan especially, you know, took it by the scruff of the neck and you know, sort of created the look of the show that went forward into later seasons. So by the time I came back, the look had been created and everybody knew what they were doing. Do you know what I mean? Or you knew sort of the wheelhouse that you needed to be in. You know?
I think with shows like that though, because they're a year apart, sometimes longer, people don't notice. You know,
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
It's not it's only afterwards. You know, when you can back to back.
Yeah, and then as a DP, there's an amount of navel gazing that goes on as well. That you're looking at, you know, you're looking at things in a detail that most people don't. You know.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you find in going into Vikings after then it was like a less stressful experience? Like you felt confident going into that?
Not necessarily. I mean, the Vikings. I think I was lucky in that I was so after Game of Thrones, I went and did a season of Ripper Street, and then immediately after that, or maybe the 2 seasons of Ripper Street actually, and then so after Game of Thrones, I went and did Ripper Street, and then after Ripper Street, I did second unit on Vikings. So, like doing second unit on Vikings, I was familiar with the crew. I was familiar with how the show ran. I knew sort of pretty much everything about it by the time I came to shoot the second season as the main unit DP, because the way they run it, the second unit DP shoots a couple of days out of every block. So you're a second unit DP, but you're shooting with a full unit drama sequences for, a couple of days every couple of weeks.
Right.
As well as doing sort of the traditional second unit stuff,
Oh, so you're still shooting some drama stuff then on the second
You
unit.
are, yeah. So by the time I came to shoot the main unit on that show, I knew how it worked,
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
So I think we're gonna,
Where are we now?
yeah, we've gone all over our questions list now. I'm trying to work out where we are.
Okay, well, we're still on Vikings. What's the approach then to, because big interest of mine, filming like the battle scenes? I mean, like, do you like to be in the crowd, and what like cameras are you using, and how many cameras?
Yeah, so like normally we would like it's a 2-camera show, but for a lot of it, I mean, I would say for maybe 60% of the time, you have 3 cameras, and then for the battle sequences, we normally have 4. I think there might have been occasions on when we had 5 or 6, but usually it's 4. And the approach, I mean, it depends, because every battle sequence is different in that they've sort of got a different mini story going on within them. But usually the approach is that we'd shoot a couple of big wide sequences first, usually with 4 cameras, so the 4 cameras can all keep out of each other's shot easily enough. So you'd normally do a couple of, and that involves a lot of choreography of stuntmen and all that. So it sort of warms everything up. So the approach usually is that you would shoot 2, possibly 3, or maybe even 4 passes of like a big melee, and generally all 4 cameras would have fairly wide shots. And then once you feel, and after take 1, you may move the cameras, or you may leave them in position, or depending on how it's gone and what the action's like, and what the director feels that he or she needs from that particular pass. You do 2 to 3 passes on that, and then you tend to move into the drama of the fight. Yeah. So usually that's scripted in terms of now Ragnar faces off against King whoever, and for those, the stunt choreography has obviously been done in advance. So the general approach then is you start to work your way in, and see what the action is. And generally what we do is we put 2 cameras on the specifics of the action, like the specific beat that you're trying to execute, and the other 2 cameras would pick off other stuff, keeping out of each other's shots, obviously. Yeah. And that's generally how you proceed through the day. And for the it's a while since I've done the show now, but generally from memory, you normally have 1 camera. Usually the battle sequences are handheld. So the initial wide shots and stuff would be cranes or long tracks or whatever that might be. But usually once you get into the nitty gritty of the action stuff, handheld tends to be the way to go. And usually what you'd have is
long lenses on those wider shots sometimes.
Yes, exactly. I mean, so like for those big wide shots, what you'd often do is maybe have 3 very wide lenses, and then I used to always carry a 3-to-1, which is what is it? It's like a 420mm lens on the long end for Panavision, a Primo 3-to-1 zoom. So it's 420 on the long end. So usually A and B cameras would usually be on primes, and then C and D cameras would normally be on zooms. The C camera would normally be on an 11-to-1 zoom, and the D camera would often be on the 3-to-1, the 420mm lens. So usually you'd have maybe 3 wide shots on any pass and 1 longer lens. But
Yeah.
that wasn't a hard and fast rule. That's just that would have been a common occurrence. And then as you moved in, we tended to go to wider lenses. So usually for the battle stuff, what we tended to do was keep one camera wide and close, so maybe on a 27mm or 35 or 40 or something like that. And then usually the B camera would be profile on a 75 or thereabouts, and a slightly longer profile. So it is far enough away that it keeps out of the A camera shot, and it's a long enough lens that it can keep the A camera out of its shot. You know? So that's usually, and you would just often just work your way through it in that way, beat by beat, with the C and D cameras picking off whatever else needed to be picked off.
The extras killing each other.
Yeah. That sort of stuff, but also, oftentimes the C camera operator or the D camera operator might say, from this position, if I put 150mm on, I can actually get a great profile of this, or I can get the axe movement, or whatever it might be. So it's the sequences are normally storyboarded fairly carefully, and you would stick to the story. Well, again, depending on the director, some directors stick to the storyboard, some don't. But usually, you would use the storyboards as the storyboards would tell you what the A and possibly the B camera shot are in any given situation, and then the C and D have more freedom to float and find stuff.
And how long would you get to shoot on a schedule for like one of these big battle scenes?
It depends, but not very long on Vikings. Like I think 2 to 3 days. Like in the earlier seasons, I think that we used to shoot 2 days with the main unit, and then second unit would stay behind and shoot for a day or two afterwards. That changed, but like I know that the sort of the last big battle I shot, which I think is the end of season 4, it was 2 days. It was 2 days with 4 cameras. You just started and you just went at it hell for leather and shot until it got dark, and then came back and did it again the following day.
And then that was that. Whatever we've got is what we've got.
That's it. I know. I mean, like in fairness, once the scene's assembled, they'd often like bring, if they feel something is missing. But usually the directors were great, and like we knew exactly what we needed to execute, and it's also there's a fantastic crew on that show. They're very efficient. They've been doing it a long time. They really know each other. They know their way around, and yeah. So it's fast.
Right.
It's fast.
And in terms of the, you're shooting outside a lot in Vikings. I mean, there plenty of interiors as well, but so obviously the interiors, are they mainly on stages?
All on stage.
Right.
It's rare enough. Occasionally you have sets that are locations, but usually everything's on the stage.
Mm-hmm. And I won't go into the lighting of the stage work and stuff like that. But in terms of the outside stuff, are you generally hoping for grey days, or are you using any sort of HMIs or things like that for lighting and shaping? Or
it depends. Usually my approach with the show was to sort of go at natural light as much as possible, but like I would use a lot of negative, and we would tend to, like in after season 2, maybe we started to have, we always had fly swatters and stuff, but then we started to have 40 by 40 silks that we'd spend
and
over.
Stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. In order to get control of it depends. Usually the show would start shooting around May and shoot for, I guess, about 6 months for every season.
Oh, so through summer then. So it is probably
through summer.
A little less cloud than you'd want.
A little,
so you have to go with the silks.
Oftentimes. Yeah, you have to, or sometimes you just embrace it and you just go, right. Like the thing I learned very early is you can't fight it. You can't fight the weather.
Yeah.
So you sort of, if you're handed lemons, make lemonade. You know what I mean. So that was the approach, and for the most part, it worked out okay. Like definitely, once we started using the big silks, it helped things a lot, because there would have been there definitely would have been situations where we shot like entire sequences all day in cloud, and then for the last 2 hours of the day, the sun came out midsummer. And that was difficult often to do. So often we had to wait for cloud just because things just didn't match.
How are those 40 by 40s in the wind? And because especially in Ireland, where it can be pretty ferocious.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, they're if the wind comes up, you're goosed. Just have to take them down.
Yeah.
But generally, like everybody's very conscious of that. So if it looks like on the day, if you arrive in the morning and it's a blustery day, you just don't put it up. You don't even attempt it. But usually you need them when it's hard sun, and oftentimes when it's hard sun, you don't have wind issues so much.
True. True, yeah.
So they generally worked out okay.
Yeah.
Got a question here, PJ. Do you prefer the less is more approach to lighting scenes, if appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, look, it depends on the show. It depends on the show, and it depends on the scene. But yeah, whenever possible, like certainly with Vikings, the approach was to light through windows, was to key through windows. If there was one window, you had one light. Obviously you supplement a little for close-ups and whatnot, but for the most part, where possible, like less is more.
Yeah, I think I remember reading, I think in ASC magazine or something years ago, that you did a little trick with it, like even just like a 650 or something, and you put like frame after frame, with a foot gap between each.
Yeah,
and it just really diffused that small light and made it a lot bigger. And it made it feel like it wasn't coming from anywhere particular.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
That would have been approached quite a bit. But I mean, with the advent of LEDs now, I've sort of moved away from that. But I do the same. I do the same thing. I mean, I do the same thing. I mean, for a show like that, it's for me anyway. It's about big soft sources.
Sure.
Oftentimes, we built quite big soft boxes for that show. Which were cumbersome at times, but get them in close and turn them on at a very low level and let it just wrap around and no shadows.
Were you tending to? I know with obviously LEDs and stuff, but when you do use the LEDs, are you dialing them right down to 2600 or whatever they go down to, or are you still going with some tungsten lights and then dimming that down because that you can get that real kind of fire color with the lower dim tungsten?
Yeah, I mean, generally, well, on Vikings, I never really, it's a couple of years now since I shot an episode of Vikings, and for the most part, like the boxes I built were tungsten boxes, so they tended to be dimmed tungsten to do that, to get to lower color temperature and have that warm effect. But like oftentimes for Vikings as well, I'd use real flame through silks or through I tend to use Lux 400, the Lee filter quite a bit, which is like a heavy diffusion filter, and I'd stick a 8x4 frame right beside the matte box and put a flame bar behind it, and so just have a very soft, warm, but you get some movement from the light and feels, because firelight's actually quite hard, so it can give you quite nasty shadows and stuff at times,
I never thought about diffusion on fire, but I suppose you're right. It needs to be done.
Sometimes look, again, it depends on the scene. Sometimes it suits, it suits to have hard shadows, or but for the most part, what I would try to do is soften it a bit.
Yeah. I think we had in our list of questions just about I know we were discussing before we went live about who sort of set the look, as it were. But like you were saying with Game of Thrones, the look changes a little bit, from season to season. And I'm sure it did on Vikings. In terms of the look, I mean, for me, the color grade, I think, almost made it iconic. It's a bit like Ozark, Ozark's got that color grade, and you guys kind of owned that grade for Vikings. Well, desaturated look and the grittiness that it gave. What was the thoughts behind that, and the way you kind of you deal with the fire and the daylight and the way you light it as well? Can you give us an idea of like the creative thought behind all that kind of thing?
I wasn't involved in creating the look in season one. That was Johan Renck, who was the director who kicked it off, and John Barclay, the DP, and they Johan wanted it like a very gritty, like extremely gritty, desaturated look, and he didn't want any green. He wanted to, I guess, part of the storyline of season one was that the Vikings needed to leave where they lived because of it was poor land and not very fertile. So he tried to eliminate the color green from the palette entirely.
Right.
So he was also keen to have coppery skin tones rather than orange skin tones, and it was a very brave and successful look. I mean, it looked great. In season two, when I came in, we probably softened it a little, kept the grade. The prohibition on green sort of went away eventually, because if you're shooting in Ireland, you're going to have green. That's just the reality of it, So we maybe sort of weren't that prescriptive about that, but we definitely kept the look that John and Johan had set, and then in later seasons it did develop, but and towards the end it was actually quite saturated. I think certainly after I left, it got progressively more saturated, but there was never any one of the great things about that show is the producers never gave any directives. They trusted the creatives to make the right choices. So it evolved, and you had the freedom to try things and the freedom to change things. So it just did naturally evolve, but there was never any conscious decision to. There was never a time where we were like, okay, well now we need to make it more saturated, or now we need to make it less contrasty or whatever. So it did develop. So I guess that on season two, I just worked within the parameters that had been set on season one and made whatever changes that I felt needed to be made to suit my style of shooting and my style of lighting.
Yeah. And are you? I guess I was just thinking. Do you have to? Obviously, you've taken like the look from season one and you're augmenting it a little bit, but are you having to sort of look at the contrast ratios and things like that, or you kind of just look at things and you go, I can see by eye what they're going for?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, there was never a question of trying to mimic or copy anything. It very much was just make it look as good as you can. Like the executive producer, the main executive producer is a guy called Morgan O'Sullivan, very wise man who's been around this industry for a long time, and like his only instruction to me when I started on season two, he was like, he said. You have complete creative freedom to do whatever you want to do. He said the only thing that you have to always keep in mind is we're striving to deliver feature film production values on a TV budget and a TV schedule. He said that's what you have to always think about. But beyond that, do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, well, that's why we wear T-shirts saying magician, isn't it? Because we always put in a corner and we're told to make magic somehow.
We got a question here, which leads on to a question you had, Simon, coming up now about the Blood Eagles.
Yeah, so someone's actually brought up the Blood Eagle episode, and I mean I remember messaging you, I think after I watched it originally, and let's see what the exact question is. So you clearly had fun playing with the imaging camera on some of the episodes you've done. And such as the moments with the soothsayer, and also when they're on drugs worshipping the gods, moments like that. One moment in particular that springs to mind that someone else has brought up is the Blood Eagle episode, which not only is it a horrible torture method, but also, I think it was beautifully shot, and it could, you could just shoot it on a wide and it would just be disgusting, but you shot it in actually quite a romantic kind of way, and I love that kind of headspace that you guys gave the show in terms of making it into a very poetic sort of worshipping, that kind of sense to gravitas to the whole thing. I think it was really nice. Can you just talk a little bit about how you approach that and what you did to try and get that look?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is that it is a very gruesome form of execution, torture, whatever, and we weren't really allowed to show anything. It had to be suggested rather than shown. So Carrie Scoggin, the director, was very keen. First of all, she wanted to be quite ceremonial, and then she was keen for it just not to be gruesome, but to have that poetic quality that you've described. So we were trying to think of ways to do it. So we wanted to make it a little surreal and not have it be entirely, entirely realistic.
Yeah.
So the first thing we decided to do is shoot everything at 96 frames. So the entire sequence was shot at 96 frames a second, which is challenging. Then we decided we weren't going to use any artificial light. We were only going to use firelight. So there's only fire. We didn't use any film lamps at all. Everything was lit by flame, which became a challenge for stop then. So the bulk of the, especially at 96 frames, as you can imagine. So the bulk of the sequence is shot with a T1 lens, a 50mm, a Panavision Super Speed T1 50mm lens. At 96 frames per second, and I can't remember. Maybe we shot at 1600 ASA. We certainly shot with a 360-degree shutter,
right?
Just in order to get the extra stop and so that we could shoot with available light.
Yeah.
And then so the A camera was on Steadicam the whole time, and the B camera was on a lens baby the whole time. So the A camera was Steadicam.
The PL mount lens baby.
T1. Yeah, I think it might even be a PV mount one on that they have.
Yeah. So were you on Panavision camera Alexa then?
Panavision, yes, on Alexa, on PV adapted Alexas. But the lens set usually is Primos.
Panavision Primos, right? Yeah.
Panavision Primos, yeah. But for this, we used a 50mm super speed. It's an uncoded lens, and it just had that quality. We knew it would flare in interesting ways, and then I
it was an uncoated T1.
Uncoated T1 lens, wide open.
So that's a lot going on.
And especially for Alan Butler, the focus puller on Steadicam at 96, because the operator Ian was moving that, he was throwing that camera around the times. So Alan did remarkable work on that. But and then the shot that's up now was a lens baby shot. So it was, we were very consciously trying to make it not look realistic and to imply what was going on without seeing it, and making it sort of visually interesting enough for the audience that they didn't actually need to see what was going on. That was the main thing, I
think that's always the best thing with horror sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that was the approach, and we shot it, I think, over the course of about 4 or 6 hours, and we burned a lot of gas. But the other thing was that we were aware that the flame was just going to go to white because we were shooting wide open, and all that, and we decided to embrace that. So we went specifically in the grade. We decided we weren't going to make it orange, or we weren't going to try to retain detail in the flame, or to use the fact that the flame would look strange and white. Use that to our advantage, make a virtue of that rather than. Rather than try to maintain the color in the flame,
Sure, yeah. And in terms of I swear I read something about you getting bits of ice or glacier or something and shooting through that at some point.
No, I mean, yes. So what I did, so I had a sort of set of homemade filters made with window glass, various types of distorted window glass that I punched holes through or cut shapes through, and had them cut to the size of a filter tray. So I use those quite a bit. I use them I use them pretty much at every show at some stage or another. And what it does is that the parts that have been punched through will be in focus, and then the parts that obviously have not been punched through will be soft, and often that softness falls away, and it's unusual, not dissimilar to the lens baby look, but a little different, you know.
Yeah.
And I use those a lot. I use those a lot on Vikings.
I think it look great. And is that are you referring to scenes, you know, with the soothsayer and things like that, or
Yeah,
when
exactly.
you know, going in that kind of dream sort of state? Hallucinations. Yeah.
Yeah, the B camera operator for the seasons 2 and 3, especially Laszlo Bile, the Hungarian camera operator, who's got a fantastic eye. Laszlo, I just sort of say to Laszlo, you know, take some glass, find a shot. So the A camera shot would get the, you know, I don't want to say the safe shot, but the shot that you know executed the scene, and then the B camera would often try to find stuff with shooting through glass or in some distorted manner, and that stuff usually made the show. Often not where I would have wanted it to make the show, but you know, like oftentimes, so you know, you'd put glass in front of the filter or whatever, or use a filter, put glass in front of the lens to distort it, and I'd be looking at the monitor and I'd see something was sublime, just to be a moment when it was fantastic, and then for a lot of the take it wouldn't be so great, and then I'd often look back at some of the episodes and be like, why did you use a bit that wasn't so great? You know, there was a bit that was just beautiful that never made it. But anyway,
I have to get your tip on how to make those filters, because I did a sort of I guess you'd say a short film type commercial for a brand, and we had these dancers around fire, and I was trying to simulate something like what you did, but without using a lens baby, because I was using my Alexa, so I didn't have the PL mount, but I just put Vaseline around the edge, and it obviously the Vaseline kind of made all the flaming torches kind of flare really nicely, and it did give it that otherworldly look, and I shot in slow motion and everything else. It worked quite well, but now I know the glass thing. I'll try that next time.
Same concept. Yeah, no, it's good. And like I've sort of nearly every job I do, I get a new set of them made with different types of glass, and some work really well, and then some don't work quite so well. But you know, you just get strange optical aberrations happening, you know, in camera, and for me, that's always the best way to go. You know.
Yeah, definitely.
So. Moving on then, after these shows, you've gone on to do episodes of like Enter the Badlands and also Carbon, of course. How did you find going into these shows where, I guess you sort of spoke about before, where you was jumping in as a DOP and having to replicate the look of the show already?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the show. I mean, I think I found Into the Badlands tough because it's very prescriptive in terms of like, it's actually the only show I've ever been on where you're handed a Bible where it says, you know, these are the things you must do, these are the things you must not do, and I found that quite restrictive actually, and I don't know that it suited the way I work that well, you know. So, but Autocarbon was different. Autocarbon, I had sort of been given the imprimatur to, you know, change what I wanted. You know, I mean, I think the producers were really happy with, and rightly so, with how season 1 looked, and they wanted to maintain that, you know, that quality. But there was never a suggestion that it had to be absolutely replicated. You know, but having said that, like we had the gaffer from season 1 and the rigging gaffer from season 1, so like they had, you know, designed with you know, the DPs from season 1, they designed the lighting for certain sets, and we just went with that again. You know, like why would you change it? It looked so good, you know.
Yeah. In terms
so that was, I didn't find, so usually like it does depend on the show, I guess, but usually I haven't found that to be too much of an issue, like coming in and you know, working within the parameters of the show. Into the Balance was different in that was very prescriptive, and that I did struggle with that a little, you know.
Are you having to obviously watch and do some screen grabs and things of previous episodes, just so then you're like, you know, really study them in terms of going, to try and help, you know, especially on Altered Carbon that has, you know, it's sort of based in the Blade Runner world, as it were. And I mean, obviously, I don't know if they demolished the sets in between the series, but I'm guessing that they're going to rig it in a similar way for the second series, obviously without new locations. But
yeah, I mean, the thing about the thing about season 2 is it was the same. It was it was the same studio and effectively the same set modified, but it was meant to be a different planet. It was meant to be a different place. So the challenge with that was trying to make it look sufficiently different so that it didn't look like the same place, and yet not so different that it looked like a different show.
Right.
So that was a difficult balance to strike, to be honest. And I think at certain times it was more successful than others. But it was a different world. It was a different planet than season 1. So there was some freedom.
Yeah, and then so I mean, I had a question here. The production design and that side of things is it's amazing. It's amazingly done, that show with Altered Carbon. What type of lights and do you tend to use for, say, in the hotel and on the main city walkway to amplify the sort of sci-fi Blade Runner vibe?
Well, it tends to be a lot of LED. Like there's a lot of LED. The sky panels, a lot of sky panels, and then a lot of LED strips. A lot of we didn't have a stereo tubes, but if they had been available at the time, we would have used a lot of those, I'm sure. But we did have like 4-foot LED fluorescent, for one of a better way to put it. So a lot of LED, and then like I tended to use 20Ks through windows and stuff quite a bit for hard lighting, and then 10Ks and stuff as well.
20K tungsten. Yeah.
So tungsten, tungsten.
Because you're in a studio, you just balance.
You're in a studio, exactly. So to balance the tungsten, but mostly LEDs. Like we use a lot of 360s, sky panel 360s, and S60s.
There's quite a lot of. I noticed there's quite a lot of wider shots, in say the hotel room when they're all, which is their their discussion area, shall we say?
Yeah.
But obviously and I'm noticing it more and more on shows now, where you're sitting wide, and I'm like, where the hell are the lights? Where do they keep them? Because you see the ceiling, you're seeing everything else. And so is it all above? Because obviously it's all...
Yeah, for that set in particular, mostly was above. But what I tried to do is like through the window, and actually key it through the window as much as possible. But like the advantage in that set particularly is that all of the countertops had LED built in. So all of the countertops were self-illuminating. So you could key...
Yeah.
Exactly. So you could key through the windows and then have the underlight. But there was, like, up above... There was a whole gantry with LEDs.
Are they usually just soft top light then over the whole thing?
Soft top light, which is not something that I would tend to do a lot, to be honest. It's like on a show like The Alienist, for example, didn't do that at all ever.
I noticed you like the sort of the more moodier side, shall we say, of lighting. But that's just because it's more interesting, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. And like, I don't know if that's a conscious thing. It's just, I try to read a scene, figure out, what the mood of the scene is. And then generally, I probably do tend to like things a bit darker than a lot of people, but,
But it's more interesting. I mean, if you want it all, top lit, everything really bright, then it's just,
Yeah, so I tend not to do that. But then, like a lot of the shows I'm doing, have been period shows. So
they suit that.
It tends like lighting through windows tends to work well.
Mm-hmm.
But with that show, so anytime you looked up and saw the ceiling on Altered Carbon, that was a CG ceiling.
Okay. So, because I've seen it on other shows as well, and I'm like, how the hell did they like that? Because I'm seeing the ceiling and I'm seeing the floor.
No, it's a lot of top light. Yeah.
Quickly, I'm going to backtrack. There's a question here that's just popped up back on Vikings. They're saying so much of it's shot on water. How challenging was that? Or not that bad?
Not that bad. So all of the water stuff, even the stuff occasionally. We would actually go to sea. We'd actually go out onto the sea, but 90% of the time, if not more, all the water stuff is shot on a lake. So, and it's generally it's a very still lake. So we didn't, it wasn't that challenging. So we would generally, we generally had a crane on a small catamaran. So our A camera normally lived on a crane, so we were able to do crane moves on a boat, effectively, and that would tend to be. And then handheld, when we got actually into the boats, handheld tended to work best. Long lens from outside, obviously, from ribs or whatever, and then handheld in the boat, and in the boats, and then the crane work, which sort of we started on season 2, and by the end of season 2 had kind of perfected. I think those guys can put that crane anywhere.
Remote heads were you using? Were you having to use any aqua sort of heads that could go underwater?
No, we never did. We had splash housings for the cameras, and we did some underwater work. But that particular lake where we shoot is it's actually very dark water. It's a peat lake. Like it's a lot of the water's coming down off the mountains.
Nice and creepy.
Yeah, so it's very dark. So it's not actually great for doing underwater work. So for a show that's about guys at sea all the time, there's actually not a huge amount of underwater work. But we did a lot of splash housing work where we semi-submerged cameras or have cameras on the surface of the water, and we very consciously tried to do that as much as we could to try and feel feel.
They always jump out of the boats and run into the attack people, so you've got to have some kind of protective housing and get the camera.
Yeah, exactly.
In the water,
so, but oftentimes the protective housing was a clear poly bag, and the operators just with their trousers rolled up to their knees.
Yeah. I was going to ask, how did you find your work has evolved to take you onto these bigger and better shows? I mean, obviously you did Game of Thrones and Vikings and Game of Thrones again, and you've done quite a lot of episodes on Vikings. Have you had to approach the lighting and camera work any differently, or is it just larger lights, larger bounces, larger diffusion, bigger camera toys? Do you just have to you go, yeah, all right, do you just carry on? Or?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is a bit of that. Look, it depends on the size of the set, because at the end of the day, like what I often find is like so you're on a huge show, but at the end of the day, you may be in a small room with 2 people and 1 window. Do you know what I mean? So it's the only thing bigger about it is that you've got 40 production vehicles sitting outside instead of 2. But it's the same approach. You're using the same. It's the same approach, really. I guess it's the bigger sets are where the difference comes in, and on Game of Thrones, like some of those sets were bigger than anything else I've ever encountered.
Where the chair is, whoever has the chair and stuff, they're big rooms, aren't they?
Yeah, and Dragonstone, the throne room in Dragonstone, that was just a huge set, So, but like again, like the rigging team on that, and the gaffer Tom Gates, the Dragon gaffer. Main unit. There's 2 units on Game of Thrones, and they're not really like a main unit and a second unit. They are 2 main units, but the gaffer on the unit that shot the most, Tom Gates, like Tom had just done it so much that when you did have a new set, like he had a very good handle on what needed to happen.
So he'd be like, okay, yeah, well, I know this is old school to me. This is definitely like 418Ks into a bounce and then back through another back through the fuse.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I mean, it's I didn't have that many new sets to originate. I had some, but like Tom would work with all the DPs, and so it was a conversation back and forth. Do you know what I mean? But they, like, those guys weren't phased by, if you said you wanted 12 T24s, then you got 12 T24s. They weren't phased by anything, Yeah.
I think James might want to know this question as well. But like in terms of your relationship with the directors on these shows, where I think you might have answered it a little bit before, but when you go from series to series, show to show, are you the one who's kind of like suggesting the shots to get in order to finish the scene and move on to the next scene and blah blah blah, or are you always or you always still, because you've been on it and then a new director's turned up, if you see what I mean. Because often the DP is on it longer than the director is sometimes. Are you the one suggesting the shots, and they're more on the acting and stuff, or is it?
No. I mean, it depends on the director. Some directors, are very, very clear about what they want, and others, it's not that they're less clear, but they take a less regimented approach. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it completely depends on the personality of the director, and it also depends on how my personality meshes with the personality of the director. Do you know what I mean? Because a different DP may handle, a situation differently than I would, and the director may do things in a different way because of that. So it, you find in prep, you try to find what the relationship is and develop it from there. Like on a show like Vikings, like when you go into the Great Hall, for example, like I would have shot in that Great Hall. I shot 30 odd episodes of Vikings. It was definitely there was at least one scene in every one of those episodes, and usually far more than one. So I would have shot that set, but by the end I would have shot that set 50 times or more. Yeah. So you have a fair idea of what works. You have a fair idea that if you're on this side of the room, it's not as good as if you're on that side of the room, or whatever that might be. Yeah. So you can steer a director in that, but like I would never be in a position where I would say to the director, no, like don't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or you can't do that, or that's not the style of the show, or that's we don't do that on this show. Like that would never arise. You would try to. I mean, if there was something like, and there are situations where I feel like what a director's trying to do is maybe not the best decision. So you'd maybe like that's how I would approach it. I would say, I think that's maybe not the best idea. How about something else? But if the director ultimately wants to do your plan A, then we do plan A.
Just like you said, you'd been there and like how to do the scenes, and obviously the directors change. I was just wondering if sometimes DPs have to lead the way a little bit, and then the directors, it's their vision.
I don't know if it's leading the way, but like I would often jump in and say, I think we need another angle, or I think we need, with a lens, I'd be like, I think we'd be better moving in closer in a wider lens, or do you know what I mean, like that? But that's just a constant discussion, and that's always in the setup of a shot, And some directors are more receptive to that than others. Some have a very clear idea of what they want, and others, like I was on, I'm not going to name the show or the director, but I was on one show with one director, and on the first day we were on a tech sketch, and I said, it'd be great if we're like down low here, I'm looking up at the whatever, and the director said, yeah, it's not a bad idea. He said, but that's the first and last time of the show I want you to suggest a shot. You know what I mean? But that's really unusual. Like that is not, that's not the norm. You know what I mean? So occasionally we would come across a director who's like that. But for the most part,
but you understand what people are like in prep, and that's where you get to know someone over a beer, and if they're either collaborative or they're not, or if they want to do their way, then you just go with their way.
Oh, of course, exactly. And but I mean, what I must say is I've been very lucky in that most directors I've worked with have been very respectful of what it is that I bring or try to bring. And look, there are often times when I'll say to the director, I think we should do this, and they'll say, I don't think so, and that's fine too. That's totally fine.
I think everyone should always be open, and people it's better to have more ideas on the table, isn't it, than none at all. I think.
I'm never offended if that happens. You know what I mean? Like that's fine.
Yeah.
But
somebody else has asked a question which sort of ties in with that a little bit, like talking about the process leading up to the filming of the scene. Like, do you go through, like I said, if you brought in a director, is there still storyboards that have been done that you go through, or previs and stuff like that?
Yeah, look, it depends on the show, but usually the process is that you would work with a director depending on so on Vikings you'd have less prep time because as the sole DP on a season, you get time to prep the first couple of episodes with the first director very intensively, but after that you're just snatching time here and there with each subsequent director. So on a show like that, generally the process would be that the director would work with the storyboard artist and come with storyboards, and then as DP, I'd have input and I'd say, okay, I think this. How about if we did something a little differently or whatever? But usually not so much, usually because on the day things change anyway, and it's rare enough that you stick rigidly to storyboards. Some directors do, but most don't. So there's always room to change things.
It's like you don't. I'm presuming you don't even get time to do shot lists on shows like that.
On shows like that, generally the directors would always have a shot list. Okay. It'd be unusual for a director not to have a shot list. In fact, I would say they always do. But like usually I would try to do as much prep as absolutely. And on a show like Game of Thrones, there was always a lot of prep time. So you did very intensive prep all the time, and it's an ongoing developing process, and there might be 3 or 4 different passes of storyboards as you go through them. But and some directors like the DP to be involved in the storyboard process from the get-go, to sit in with the storyboard artist, and I've done that. And then other directors like for the DP not to be there, or maybe to try and find it themselves with the storyboard artist as they're going through. But I would never take it that I was being cut out of the process when that happens, because usually once you're shooting it, they change anyway.
Yeah,
to a greater
often do, don't they? You end up throwing it out the window.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the exception would be something like very VFX heavy, like if then you generally tend to stick fairly rigidly to the storyboards. But in most situations, because actors won't, necessarily stand where you have them in the storyboards, or the blocking of the scene might be different. So storyboards, in my experience, tend to be a guide, but after that, they develop.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to sort of start wrapping things up a little bit, because we've gone with an hour and 11 now. So I was just going to sort of a final sort of, before we sort of finish things up. I mean, you've obviously done a lot of your work in television, and now, Disney big shows and things like that. Do you prefer this medium now? Would you find, having been doing it a few years, over feature films? Or are you thinking of maybe going back to feature films? No,
I mean, it's not necessarily that I have the choice. Do you know what I mean? It's like, like, just being perfectly honest, it just so happened that, when I reached a point in my career when I was being offered bigger work, television was just taking off. It was becoming and that's just what's tended to be the situation. And what I found in the last couple of years is that on a few occasions when I've been sort of in the running to do features, doing so much television has stood against me with some directors, where they feel like I'm a television guy. I don't make the distinction, really. Like, I try to shoot beautiful images, and I try to construct scenes, in a cinematic way. Whether it's television or film doesn't really impact on me. Obviously, it impacts on it has an impact on the budget and the schedule and that sort of stuff. But in terms of how I'd approach shooting a scene, where it ends up is not my primary consideration ever. I shoot stuff the same way, whether it's film or TV. And I don't make the distinction. Some people do. I don't. I would like to shoot features, but it hasn't worked out for me lately. The type of features I would like to shoot haven't come my way, and a lot of the features I've been offered are just things that I'm not that interested in shooting. What's sort of happened in the last few years is that the work that I want to shoot has been on TV.
The TV is bigger now than it ever has been, and it's certainly bigger than most.
The standard of TV is amazing now. So
it's bigger than most.
It is as well, and it's not necessarily about it being big, but it's just the quality of the material and the quality of the production and the quality of the production values and all of those things, you know. So in just the way things have worked out in the past couple of years, it's tended to be all television. But I would love to shoot a feature.
I think there's definitely a stigmatism still about well, from both sides. I mean, I'm having it.
Yeah.
You know, I've been speaking to a lot of DPs, you know, during this whole lockdown thing, and I'm wanting to move more into TV, and I've done primarily features. But I know that, you know, a lot of producers in TV will say, well, you know, you've only done features, you can't do 10 pages a day or something. But I've done features that have to probably do more than that, you know.
No,
and I think there's
course.
definitely still that stigmatism where, you know, producers from one realm and the other realm, they think you can't do one or the other, even
until
though
you've done.
Yeah.
And then they're like,
no,
oh yeah,
yeah, yeah, and you know, I don't know. I wouldn't want to criticize anyone's sort of view on things, but like for me, I've never made the distinction. You know, it's drama, it's a camera, you know, it's ending up on a screen.
Yeah.
Whether that screen is, you know, in a cinema or in
you have to work to a certain speed though for TV, right? You have to work to a certain level of so many pages a day because sometimes it's short. Well, we all know it is generally a shorter time to film than the bigger films.
It is for sure. I mean, I think it's probably like it's probably a third. You probably have a third of the time as, you know, on a TV show that you would have on a big feature in terms of the amount of screen time versus the amount of days you have to shoot it. You know, and that's just the reality of it, and you get used to that. But I mean,
you know, how many days do you get on say Vikings or like even Ripper Street?
So in Vikings, it would tend. In Vikings, you'd have. It was like 10 days of main unit and 2 days of second unit per episode, so 12 days per episode. But some episodes would be more because they would be more, you know, there'd be more involved in terms of battle sequences or whatever. But the general model would be each block was a 4-week block for the main unit, and you do 2 episodes in a 4-week block, two 5-day weeks for each episode, and then there were 2 or possibly 3 what were called crossover days where the director went and worked with a different unit to pick stuff up that couldn't be scheduled as part of the main days or whatever. And then, you know, Game of Thrones was significantly greater amount of days. You know, you'd have up to, I don't know, maybe like 30 days an episode, or maybe 30 days a block. So more, in fact. So you might have up to, between the different units, you might have 15 to 20 days an episode on Game of Thrones. But usually it's in or around 10 to 12 days. The Alienist, I think, was 16 days an episode.
So that's more than Vikings.
Yeah, so it depends.
Sorry? The Alienist was more days than Vikings to shoot an episode.
The Alienist was more days than Vikings. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That was the first season. I didn't shoot the second season. There may be less in the second season, but you know, so it depends. But you're generally in around the I suppose 12 to 15 days per episode. You know, for that sort of high end TV.
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty tight. I mean, I think on the big films, you know, like Mission Impossible, things like, you know, the Marvel features, they're looking at, you know, 6 months of filming or say. But
no, I mean,
but then on indie features, you're doing, you know, 25 days or something like that, you know, for an hour and a half, 2 hours. So it's almost the same as a TV show.
It's very similar. It's very similar. And you know, like the thing is, like on those big TV shows, the crews tend to be very efficient. That's what helps you out. So you know, like if you're starting with a 25-day feature from scratch, it takes a couple of days for the crew to get into their stride, and maybe sometimes they don't get into their stride. You know what I mean? So whereas when you fall in to do an episode of a big TV show, generally the crew have been at it a while. You know, even if it's the first season, you know, usually there'll be at least a couple of episodes behind them. So, you know, they've gotten into a groove, and that helps. Like that, the efficiency of that definitely helps.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, thank you very much, PJ. That's been
my pleasure.
A very good insight.
It sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll have to get some email you about the tips on which glass to buy and how to smash it.
No problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
All right.
thanks everyone for watching. We hope you
Thank you,
enjoyed
guys.
this Q&A for episode 7. And we'll see you next week. Same time, I think. Same place. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks,
Take care.
guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys.
PJ.
Lovely. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.